Welcome to the Finding Good podcast. My name is Brian Fretwell. For the majority of human history, connection was a daily practice. But it wasn't just a practice to make us feel good, to find out about somebody's day. It was a survival necessity. How we showed up around the campfire, the story we shared about where the blueberries were found, how we found them, what strengths we used to find them, and every detail about our experience increased the chances that us and our tribe would survive. In today's podcast, we are focused on using this process and practices of connection to help create clarity. We're going to talk about a really specific practice that I'm excited about that you don't think about often when you're thinking about connection, and that is feedback. We're going to talk about feedback from the science standpoint, and then feedback with how we can get feedback through this process of providing clarity. I'm going to talk in the beginning about what are some of the limitations of how we approach feedback and how we engage with feedback in different people. And then we're going to have a conversation about how we create it. We have a fantastic guest today, Jen Heston, who has been using the Finding Good process for a while and has discovered a way of how engaging it has allowed her to get feedback that she might not have gotten before. I'm excited about it because that can be a very vulnerable conversation to have. Just identifying that I might need feedback, right? It can be a struggle. I know that it is a struggle for me. Prior to that conversation, Ren and I are going to have a little bit of a conversation about feedback and the science. Then we're going to jump on and talk to Jen about her connection practice and how it relates to feedback. And then we're going to open the doors to anybody that wants to jump on. We're going to have a Finding Good conversation with Jen. So with that, I'm going to bring Ren to stage. Welcome, Ren. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, good. We talked earlier. I updated the website today, so I'm pumped. I'm excited. So for anybody that wants to be able to find the future podcasts, we have the events on the findinggood.com page. But Ren, what do you think about this idea of where connection and feedback kind of play together or don't play together? What do you think about?
Yeah, I think my initial thought on that is when you have strong connection, the feedback almost gives itself.
Yeah, tell me more, because I feel like you have some experience with that.
I think one of the things that happens a lot, especially in the workplace, a manager feels like they're walking on eggshells when they're giving feedback. And that's generally a big signal that that person who's receiving the feedback doesn't feel probably safe or feel seen, valued, heard. And the more we can connect, the more we can understand, approach conversations with the desire to understand one another, the easier it is for the other person to see your perspective and naturally see your experience and naturally either inform you so that you can come together or create the solution because they're closest to the work anyway.
Yeah, I like to ask you because you have the, boots on the ground, having been the HR person for a lot and being required to do some of the feedback stuff. While I've had plenty of teams that I've managed, I've always had a bit of an issue with feedback. And the issue being, it is a completely overused term that is not anywhere near as impactful as people think it is. Feedback in general, and there were some studies that I was privy to when I was working with some of the other kind of neuroscience-based companies back in the day, that the majority of feedback in the neighborhood of 70-80%, depending on what study you're looking for, leaves the relationship worse off than it started. And in that process, actually doesn't lead to the behavior change or increase in performance that we're looking for. Now, we all have experiences where feedback was really worked for us, where we needed the feedback in the moment, where feedback definitely benefited us from whatever we were struggling with. But I would put that likely in that 20% category. Yeah. And there's a couple of things that need to be in feedback, and I'm going to talk about those and use those kind of as a basis for when we engage with Jen here in a second. The two things, and I'm curious if you know, what are the two ingredients that have to go in feedback for it to actually lessen the possibility it's going to leave a negative impact. What do you think those are based on your experience? Because I kind of heard them in some of your answer just now.
There needs to be some alignment between the two people, and that safety.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What's the other one? I'm not sure what the other one would be.
Yeah, so alignment is a good start. The number one thing is that there needs to be an agreed upon thing that they're improving. So the person getting feedback and the person giving feedback have to have a clear agreement on what the person getting feedback actually wants, right? The goal has to be clear between the two, and that goal has to be something that the person getting feedback wants. What you often see is that the leader has a goal that's not clear to the other person. They're giving feedback on, and so now I'm getting feedback on completely different things, right? Or I have a goal that I haven't communicated, and now I'm asking for feedback that this person, we don't have clarity on what it is we're talking about. So that clarity piece is likely the most overlooked and perhaps biggest to start with. That's the obvious one, or more obvious one, which I think is right in what you said with alignment, right? The other one is not so obvious, if you will. It's not so straightforward. It's actually that the person receiving feedback needs to ask for it. Yeah, the person receiving feedback needs to ask for it. And this is something, again, I used to teach years ago. When you think about that application, it's actually easy, even though it doesn't sound obvious, the person getting feedback needs to ask for it. It sounds counter to how we think about approaching it, but it's actually underlies why we approach feedback wrong so many times. Because like, if you're listening to this, I just want to like have you think about if you were in the audience right now and I asked you to raise your hand if you really love unsolicited feedback, if you look forward to it. And how many people have an experience where somebody has just told them where they could improve, what they could do better, right? Even if it's well-intentioned, even if it's relatively positive, it will shift your brain into some degree of fight or flight. Because what's happened is we have this status disequilibrium where the person says, you need to improve this, which must mean I know more than you. And so being able to ask for it helps with that disequilibrium. Because I'm prepping, like, hey, I need to improve here, so I'm giving you permission to do that. So now I don't have that jolt. But then in doing that, if we can make sure we have clarity, those are the things that allow feedback to happen, right? Just want to start that because I think I want to start the conversation around feedback as we're going to get with Jen and thinking about those two pieces, because I think they really overlay the idea of creating clarity, which is how we create connection, is that ultimately, feedback is really about getting clear on how to reach what I want to reach, right? But the breakdown in that is when we're unclear on what I want to reach, and then we're unclear on how I'm doing it, right? What I mean by that is the person sharing feedback is telling you something you've likely already tried, telling you to do something that's not in line with what you actually want to do. And all of that can be solved in some way through approaching clarity first, right? Anything you want to add before we jump on?
I mean, I think I would add a caution that even if someone has asked for feedback, chances are they have the answer already.
Yeah. I love that. I think bringing back that rule, like, don't give advice unless somebody's asked twice. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And it'll be interesting to see if that one comes on. So, Ren, I'm going to pull you off stage, pull Jen up. For those in the comments, Ren can help you get to where you need to go if you want to get on stage. Once the conversation with Jen and I wraps up, then we'll open it up to others to be able to engage, find a good conversation. Awesome. See you back here shortly. All right, so now I'm going to invite to the stage Jen Heston. She's a coach, speaker, does a bunch of other things, who has been part of this process off and on for the last couple of years, and brought Jen on today because she reached out to have a conversation about this. And when we got on the phone, I had to stop the conversation because we started to get into how she's using it to get feedback and some of those things. And because we want these conversations to be original, if you will, and not rehearsed. I had her stop abruptly and just join us today. So we bring Jen on stage to talk about feedback as it relates to connection and your specific connection practices. So Jen, how you doing?
I am doing really well, Brian. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good today. I got my microphone working. So
yeah, that's always a good.
Jen, take just a minute or two to introduce yourself, but specifically, or in introducing yourself, kind of outline like when you saw the podcast, when you were interested in reaching out for us to have a conversation, what was the practice that you were thinking about?
In thinking about that, the first thought I have is when we first encountered each other 3 years ago, and we talked about how you experienced joy and the connection I felt with my daughter because I stopped to connect with her instead of correcting her. And what actually drove me to looking around for something about connection is that I deeply feel the way that you do is that it is lacking so sorely in our world. Like we need connection more than we need water. We need connection so badly. And it's just so many people don't have the first inkling of how to get it. They think that they're connecting, they're talking to someone, they feel like their message is getting across. And then in other conversations, subsequent conversations, you find out, oh, they had no idea what I was saying at all. And that's monumentally frustrating.
And I'd like to pull back and just kind of like the idea of like when we say they, we mean we sometimes, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like the idea of like, okay, I'm creating connection here. If it's not intentional, then it doesn't happen, which is part of the practice part that we'll talk about in a little bit. But also, I think we have some really ingrained ideas of what connection is and what it's for. And so a lot of this podcast is really to help people see it more in that survival kind of perspective, to raise the importance so that then practicing connection, like being more intentional about it, isn't just so that I can feel good around friends or not be as awkward in parties, but to see it as the actual like advantage that it is and the survival necessity that it is. So tell me about if we jump right into it, like the practice you have around, using connection to, like, as we talked on the phone, talked about you getting, or I don't know if it was getting feedback or like being open to feedback through connection that maybe you weren't before, which I'll say right out of the gate, just offering that up to be like, here's how connection taught me what the hell I was doing wrong is great to tell. Right. So that's what got me excited to have you on. It's because, okay, how do we generally focus on how do we give others feedback? But you've been using connection, a practice of connection, to give you feedback that you might not have known was there. Right. Tell me a bit about that.
Well, I think the first relationship I want to touch on is the one with my partner, because that is a feedback relationship where you have a constant loop, where it's like, hey, this thing happened and I didn't love the way that happened and I didn't like how I showed up. So can I show up again that way? We have a thing in our house called retake. Coming from a theater background, it's like retake. Let me go back to that moment. I don't like how I showed up there. I was more about me than you. What do you need in this moment? And my partner and I have a practice that we do every day, which is what's on your heart and mind today. And what do you need? And sometimes that can lead to some really good conversations, because it's like, I feel like I'm really struggling this week. I need to make sure you're going to take care of this for me. And can you do this? And it's like, yeah, we were talking about the fact that I had done something, because it's the sponge problem, if you know what I'm talking about, where they notice when you leave the sponge in the sink.
Right.
But when you don't do it, there's no impetus for them to say, hey, good job not leaving that sponge in the sink. And I don't walk around needing that kind of praise. But if it's something that actually annoys you to the point that you say something to me about every time you see it, it's like, I'd like the other side of that. So, and how that leads to connection is that it's never about the sponge. It's about something else.
Can I engage that a little bit? Because there's one of the parts when I think about the find a good process and connection, that what I'm hearing is like, we have a tendency, and just as you outlined there, we have this tendency to be like, what am I not doing for you? What am I not, and then what are you not doing for me? And specifically when you said, noticing the sponge, right? And that like, We wouldn't necessarily expect to tell the other person each time, right? Like good job, you did it. And this is where this is just an avenue that I think, like, exploring this, like, what is a sponge a real thing? Number one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actual example. I'm not making it up. It's not metaphorical.
Yeah. So here's a question, and this is kind of a fine and good oriented question, just so everybody knows. This is kind of leaning into the practice as we're outlining different practices for feedback. Like, we can get into this pattern of, like, what do we need from each other, which is good. Before that, there's a level of, like, here's what you're not doing, here's what I'm not doing, here's where I'm falling short, then here's what we need for each other. The question I would want to ask for you, because I'm assuming you're the person annoyed about the sponge.
Nope, it's him.
Oh, the other way around. Okay, so can you think of the last time that you didn't leave the sponge there?
Last night.
Okay, you didn't leave the sponge there last night, right?
No.
What changed?
I was thinking about it. I was being intentional about it because I know it bothers him. And so I was
walk me through it. Did you use the sponge to do dishes or whichever that night?
I did, because he's acts of service. And so doing the dishes, I hate doing the dishes, but it's something that he really enjoys when I do it for him. So I do it for him. And a household needs dishes to be cleaned, obviously.
Yeah.
So
what was it, a conscious choice for you to then, like, can you remember, like I was washing, and then, like, when you decided to actually, like, put the
yes, I do remember going,
don't leave the sponges in the, and then what did you do with the sponge?
I put it in the back corner of behind the faucet.
And now, for those listening, this can likely feel like, what the hell is he, like, why are we walking through the details of the sponge? When you put it in that other place, in that moment, how did it actually feel?
Good, because I knew he was going to appreciate it.
And what do you think that said about, what did you want that to say about who you are?
I care about you, and I'm being intentional about something that bothers you.
So if I don't know what process allows you to do the thing that I want you to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then I can't reward you when you do it. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah. My wife hates putting dishes away, right? She's going to listen to this and get annoyed that I said that out loud, but she does not like it. Right? And we've had different discussions around it, but, like, it is not, like, doing the dishes is fine. We have different chores, if you will, but she has her little tricks of doing everything she can to talk me into doing the dishes. Now, for a long time, that was really around me getting annoyed, all the fun thoughts that roll in your head about your spouse, like, grow up, what's wrong with you? Like, all of it. I will admit that I've had, those. But what we found is that, like, as I explored it, one time I was able to put the dishes away and realize, oh, this is an act of service. Like, this is something I get to do for her.
Yeah.
But if she doesn't know I'm making that choice, it's not that I need validation. I don't need her to say, oh, thank you for doing that for me, right? But if she understands that, then we both get to enjoy that more. If that enjoyment isn't, like, if that thing that I'm doing isn't clear to her why I'm doing it, then where is the feedback that I'll receive, positive or negative? When she says, would you do this? When the non-acknowledgement becomes the acknowledgement, right? And now I've done 3 or 4 things, just like putting away the sponge 3 or 4 times is extra effort for you. You're doing it to be a good person. And then the only time you hear about it is when you didn't do it. Eventually that behavior will go away. And so when you think about that in terms of feedback, what is the behavior that he does?
You're talking about in this situation, or?
No. Like, you leave we all have them, like, my wife doesn't like to do dishes. I don't pick up anything. Like, I do. No, there are piles of Brian around the house. She used to take pictures
There are
pieces
piles of
my
Jeremy
husband.
around the house.
Ah,
So
yeah.
put your wife in that situation, I guess.
There you go. Now, can you think about the last time that you walked in the house and there was one less pile, or the pile, like he picked up the piles? And here's the question that I hope kind of annoys you a little bit. Do you know how that happened?
He had to take effort and be intentional because it doesn't come naturally to him.
Do you know that because he told you?
No, of course not.
Yeah. So that's this assumption that keeps us from having the clarity we need, right? And so if we think about, how we talked about feedback earlier, clear and agreed upon goal, right? And then asking for feedback, right? He may not know picking up the things is your goal, which is a whole other discussion. Picking up the thing isn't the goal. What is the actual goal for you?
Cleanliness, clutter-free.
Yeah.
I can't stand clutter. It makes me anxious.
And so here's where we get a little bit of clarity in here that can actually help us with the communication. You can't think when things are cluttered. Is that what I just heard? Mm-hmm. What can you do more of?
Stress.
When things are cleaned up.
Oh, when they're cleaned up, I can think clearer. I can be more present because I'm not worried about the visual noise that's around.
Yeah, you can think clearer and be present because you're not thinking about that. What are you
thinking about? You're talking about when the clutter is clear?
Yep.
When the clutter is clear, I'm able to think about our relationship. I'm able to think about our connection. I'm able to think about other things and not just...
Yeah. So it allows you to be able to focus on what's important, what matters, to think clearly. And then here's another jerk kind of question. When you talk to him about picking stuff up on the floor, do you talk about like how he hasn't picked up on the floor and how the floor is a mess? Or do you talk about, hey, how can we create an environment where I can think clearer, when I can be more present, and where I can focus on the things, and then we can focus on the things we need to?
Yeah, it would be that first one because I'm also a jerk.
And it's not.
I know, but still.
Yeah. Well, it's actually like, this is where I think connection goes in. And right now we've kind of done two explorations, right? The sponge on there, and then just in this clarity. The thing that we take for granted is that, like, it wasn't, you're communicating what you're clear on. You're clear that this annoys me, that these piles are in the way, that this is here. But without our conversation, without somebody saying, like, why does that matter? Notice even in the first couple of times I asked you, you said, well, I'm, like the first time I asked you, you're like stressed because your brain went naturally into, oh, they're asking why I'm annoyed. And I'm really clear on why I'm annoyed because our brain prioritizes that, right? I need to know where the bear is a whole lot more than I need to know where the resources are, right?
Yes.
And so our brain says, I'm really clear on what I'm annoyed, what we need help with. Where connection comes in is clarifying what we actually want. And so and it's really easy to hear that feedback thing when we say, let's get clear on this shared goal. The clarity of that goal is when it really becomes shared.
Yeah.
That when you both understand that actually it's not net, like the clothes are one part of me wanting to be more present, me needing to be more focused, me being able to think clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And I would even bet that if you talk to him about the sponge, right?
Yeah.
And what he has when the sponge is put away, that you're likely going to actually see similarities in what you're talking about too.
Yeah.
That both the sponge and the clothes represent this opportunity for you two to create more presence and more focus and more, right, presence together. How does that change how that looks at that?
It feels like a whole lot of curiosity and like, what can we do as a team? And it's super collaborative, which works for work as well as couplehood. How can we be collaborative in this moment instead of me saying, you're doing this wrong? So
Yeah, and it's not easy. I mean, I can think about times just in the last 2 weeks where I've been like, why don't you do the damn dishes? And I can picture in my head the look on her face of like, oh, there's another pile of Brian laying around the house, right? The challenge is being able to switch that into like, when I look at that, like saying, okay, here's an opportunity for me to make things easier for Jamie, right? And then even being able to communicate that again, which sounds like I'm not asking for validation, but being able to say, I put these away in hopes to make your day better.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that so that I get the validation necessarily. I mean, I want a little bit.
Sure,
right?
we all like validation.
I mean, that allows me to communicate, I did this for you because you're worth doing stuff for.
Yeah.
Right? And to be able to create that, like, hey, we're in this together, to be able to create, like, our job together is actually making things easier for each other, allowing each other to be better, to push each other and that sort of thing. Our job isn't to parent each other.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So tell me about this other. So you had that, and then there was another kind of feedback area that we had talked about.
Oh, yes. The work situation where, as an extrovert, I think it's pretty clear anybody listening can tell that I'm an extroverted person. Whenever you're in a work environment and you're the first one to speak up, that doesn't leave a lot of space for other work types. It doesn't leave a lot of space for other people to have their ideas spoken about or considered. And I had a friend of mine talk to me about how sometimes my optimism doesn't consider ramifications. And she was very nice about it, but she said, I know this is going to offend you. I'm like, no, it actually doesn't. It's a very insightful observation. I don't know what to do with it, but this is where I'm at right now.
So Jen and I are going to have another conversation, but for anybody listening, this is a Finding Blueberries podcast, and it's a live podcast. And there's some people I can see in the audience and on stage. Once Jen and I are wrapped up here in about 10 minutes, there's open invitation for any guest to join us. If you'd like to jump in and have a conversation just like the one Jen and I just had, we call them Finding Good Conversations. You don't even need a topic, or you can come and share a challenge, whichever the case is. So right back at it, Jen. So this person shared, like, this is going to make you mad, right? And you said it didn't make you mad. Like, we don't actually have to talk about what the feedback was on.
Yes, because I was explaining a situation where I did not handle something well, and that's super fun to talk about publicly. So great for me to bring that up. But I didn't want to hurt one person's feelings, so I didn't go out of my way to explain all the details, which I'm not going to do now. But I was a jerk because I didn't handle it in the most clear way possible. And what I should have done is made the boundary really clear and said, you need to take this up with another person, not me. I'm not able to be the intermediary here. I got feedback because I didn't do that, because I was talking to my friends about how upset I was about the situation. And they said, well, I love you, Jen, and your optimism doesn't always consider ramifications. And I went, I'd be offended by that, but I think that's pretty accurate. I think sometimes that is the case. That's when I get so excited and I rush into something headlong, and then I go, wait a second, I need to rethink this, because optimism carries me away, and sometimes I'm just like, this is all going to work out for the best. And it absolutely didn't. And there are ramifications.
And so you got, in this case, like this unsolicited feedback, right? Yes. Was it the boundary? You wanted to create a boundary so that didn't happen, or you got the feedback? That boundary was because you didn't do that before, and that's where the feedback came from.
This is a friend who we have kind of a rule of, I'm going to give you unsolicited advice, right? So if you want it, great. If not, it's not going to offend me if you don't take it. But I was explaining the situation, and I was saying, am I the jerk? And it was just like, yeah, you're the jerk here because you didn't do, what you should have done. And it's like,
so you did the ask for it part.
I did ask for it. Yes.
And this is one of my favorite, because you asked for it, but did you actually want it?
I really did. I really did in that situation, because I was really obsessing over it. I needed some outside opinion. Be like, hey, what do you think? And then it allowed me to see it a little bit more clearly.
So there's two things in there that I think worth exploring on the finding good part is, number one, what was it that you did in that relationship? And I heard one or two things already, but what are the things that you did that made you more open to that feedback?
You mean from the friend who gives unsolicited feedback, we have an agreement about it?
Yeah, because I can say that. I've heard people say that, and it's bullshit, right? You could tell me anything, and just as they say it, no, I can't. I am fully aware that, like, you think I can tell you anything, but that is absolutely not the case.
Well,
what is it?
This particular friend, we have that relationship.
And that's what I'm asking about. What did you do to create that?
Years of confiding in each other. We used to work together. We have a deep relationship, probably 15 years. So it's time, it's energy, it's a complete and utter BS detector. You know, like, hey, you're not really being true with yourself. Like, I don't know why you think that I'm going to buy that, but that's not what's going on here. So,
and I'm looking for the actual like strength that you had to. So you said you built it over time. And what happens is we start to say, oh, it just naturally happened because we hung out together for 15 years, right? But like, what is the action?
Being there.
Like when you think about the times that you've gotten feedback, if you can think about another big feedback time, what did you have to do to allow it?
Oh, I had to be vulnerable. I had to be willing to ask for it and mean that I wanted it.
Yeah. And what is that recipe? So like, I hear people say, I need to be vulnerable, but there is times that I'm willing to be vulnerable and not. And like, I'm wondering for you, like when you're able to get feedback, what are you doing to allow yourself to be vulnerable?
Opening myself up to the possibility I'm going to hear something I don't want to hear.
Yeah, I'm going to lean into that. What do you mean opening yourself up?
Not being so convinced that I have all the answers.
Okay, so not being convinced that I have the answers. So if I'm not doing that, what are you doing more?
I'm really curious about what I am doing. I'm really curious about how it's coming across.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now when you think about like, now we're pulling it back to this instance.
Yes.
How did curiosity show up in this instance? How were you able to lean on curiosity this time?
I was curious about when it blew up in my face. I knew I had done something wrong, but before that, I had the idea that this is probably not going to go well, but I'm going to try it anyway.
Yeah. So what was the thing you were curious about then?
I was curious if I had been just cleaner with the way I approached it, more honest with the way I had approached it, like if that would have made a difference.
So what I'm hearing in that is I was curious about what could happen.
Right.
Yeah. And that's that sort of like positive curiosity that starts to engage, because now you frame that feedback. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm curious about what is possible.
Yeah.
Then I'm more open to feedback because in that curiosity, I'm validating what already is. If I'm curious in a more binary way, if I can do it or not, how does that change that same feedback? You did that wrong.
One way or the other is wrong.
So it either goes into the box of I can't do it or I can.
Yeah.
And if it's going into those boxes, it's either an echo chamber or garbage, right? Yeah. And as we look at that from the practice of finding good, that feedback is available with vulnerability, but the real clarity in there is a vulnerability is available with the right kind of curiosity for you.
Yeah.
And so, like, for me, the clarity in that is, how do I, when I'm trying to improve something, how can I approach with curiosity? And I'm curious when you think about that, how that might change how you approach feedback in the future.
Wow. I'm just thinking about it. That is a game changer.
And what's interesting is it's what you're already doing. Yeah. And I think this is what happens. I don't think like this is, as we talk about in this podcast, this is what connection creates. It's this like the journey towards clarity is about like uncovering something that's already happening.
Yeah.
Like curiosity wasn't something that I planted, right? It was like, it wasn't my idea, my opinion or advice. It was actually like just getting into the root of you saying, oh, I'm open to feedback. And then naturally saying from there, because I hung out with somebody for 15 years and you naturally do that bullshit. but then that's our brain's way of just saying like, oh yeah, no, it just kind of happens. But then you get underneath that, like, okay, had to be vulnerable. And that was a big, like, kind of the vulnerability is necessary. But then even underneath that vulnerability, there was this trigger mechanism, right?
Yeah.
I think why that's important is that like on our own, that kind of clarity is difficult.
Agreed.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, because my brain is going to be like, oh, it's just because of so and so, and we have this great relationship, and I can talk to them about anything, and not see that actually there are a whole lot of things that I'm doing in this relationship that allows that to happen. And the more clarity I get on what I'm doing in this relationship that allows that to happen, then I can bring that into other relationships. Right.
Yeah.
And you can almost make some overlap between that curiosity and how does that curiosity show up in that first conversation we had, right?
Yeah. Jeremy's going to be really happy.
Well, because what can we do together is a fun question to engage with someone. How can we create this life we want together, right? Takes a little work and it's not easy. I'm going to pull Ren up here, but I'm going to reach out to the audience. I just want to pull Ren. I kind of gave some reflection on what I heard in the conversation. I'd love to hear Ren's perspective on the conversation. But if you'd like to come up on stage and chat about what you heard and or have me engage you in finding good discussion, I would love to have you on here. Ren, I'm curious. What's your reflection on this conversation? So we had two finding good conversations there with Jen, but what was your experience with the conversation?
Yeah, I think the one thing that struck me is I think somewhere early, like maybe the first third of the conversation, Jen, I think you even said something to the effect of being able to see it through someone else's viewpoint, vantage point, let me see it more clearly. And that really is where we ended the conversation. So it's almost like you forgot that you knew it or forgot like how powerful that is.
How do you make sense of that?
I think it's easy to forget it, that you know it when you're in the thick of it and you're trying to remember, and emotions are high, like you were saying before. Like when emotions are high, it's kind of hard to get anything else through. So it's really helpful to be reminded, you know how to do this. You've done this before. It's been replicated many, many times. And you just need a reminder that you know how to do this.
Yeah. And that reminder is that validation we talked about before. That's that piece of like, for me, like telling my wife, like, hey, I did this for you, is sending a feedback loop for myself of like, hey, I'm actually being a decent person right now. And I'm doing this because I care and love this person. And now I'm creating a kind of a stronger neural connection there. So that when I see it, the first thing I'm thinking about is the ability to do that, not the annoyance. But if that neural network, if that pathway is not being reinforced, we kind of forget it. Mm-hmm. And then even worse than that, because it's something you naturally do well, you don't see it. Yeah. And what I love about these conversations is like through the week, I would love you to reach out and be like, hey, curiosity is showing up here and here, because now it's more in your kind of executive functioning. It's more out of the periphery and more into the, right in front of you. You're going to be able to access it and use it more. Yeah. And Ren and Ken and other people watching, myself included, will also be able to use that more. because in listening to that story, we're thinking of like, how can I reframe this as curiosity? How can I approach more curiously so that I can be vulnerable, so that I can be open to the feedback that people are wrong about? Thank you for checking out the first half of this episode of the Finding Blueberries podcast. I hope you found the conversation with Jen as engaging and insightful as I did. Hope you walked away with some of your own thoughts and ideas about how you can build better environments for feedback through connection practices. That is the first half of the conversation. In the second half, we'll be talking to Ken and looking at his practices at work and discovering some ways he was building an environment for feedback that he did not think possible. And then we'll wrap up both conversations again in the second half at the end by bringing Ren and Jen and Ken all up on the stage to have a chat. Hope to see you then.